Welcome to WCAT. I'm Kiki Latimer, and I'm your host for the Catholic Bookworm, where we read to learn, but we share with love in order to understand and hopefully be transformed in our lives. Very happy to have with me today author Judy Foy. Welcome, Judy.
Thank you. Very nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Good. Judy, you've written a beautiful book called Comfort, Meeting God in Grief, and it's got a gorgeous cover. I want to just hold that up.
Oh, thank you.
And you have photographs all the way through this book that are absolutely lovely that we'll talk about.
Thank you.
So, you want to start us off with a prayer?
Absolutely. Yeah. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Loving Father, we place this time in your hands. Be present in our words and our silences today, that all who listen may sense your nearness. As we speak of grief and loss, let us remember the cross, where pain was transfigured into mercy. May your Spirit comfort the brokenhearted and awaken hope in those who mourn. We make this prayer through Jesus in the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you. That's wonderful. So for our viewers here today that aren't familiar with you, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I actually was born in Montana, but when I was just 3 months old, my parents moved to Africa. So they were a young couple heading off to Africa. My dad was a mining engineer, and we lived in small towns in Africa for most of that time. And I left when I was 20 to come to the States to complete my studies. So I finished up my undergraduate degree and then my graduate studies. And then I became a professor in neuroscience, specifically cognitive neuroscience, and had a long career in that, and just recently retired. So, adjusting to that, but finding that I have a second career that kind of builds on the first career. I always felt that I wanted my research to be focused on needs and gaps that I saw. For example, one of the things that I did with my research was to help preschoolers who enter preschool with not even knowing what a book is. And so we would give books to children and then help in the local schools, help to build their early literacy skills. But as I aged and, as life happens, I felt myself moving more and more into, especially once I retired, into the world of helping people who suffer great loss. And personally, I have lived experience, but through that lived experience saw that in loss, specifically in chronic illness and chronic pain, and people who are bereaved, that there was a real gap between the spiritual care that people were getting and the practical care. So people either received one or the other. That was at least what I was experiencing. And very rarely was there both. And I felt, in fact, I was even in a grief group where we were not allowed to talk about God. And and they would actually ask us to leave if we did that. I didn't, but I just felt really uncomfortable in it and just couldn't imagine how you could get through grief without talking about your faith. So I found other groups, but those groups tended not to be as well versed in sort of practices that are good for people in grief. So anyway, now that's what I do. I write and speak, providing resources to people who suffer from chronic illness and chronic pain, and the bereaved. And this book is, of course, is one of those resources for people in grief that really blends the care for what we know helps people move forward in grief, not getting over it, but moving forward in grief, but also that spiritual care that we really need. And on a personal side, I have a husband who's actually in the next room. I asked him to leave. He was having a sneezing fit, so hopefully we won't hear him. But wonderful husband. We've been married 38 years, and we raised two wonderful sons, and we split our time, you can probably tell from the photographs, between Southern California. Many of my photos are of Southern California, and of Northwest Montana, where we spend the summers, which is absolutely wonderful. And so that's about me.
Beautiful. So your book begins with the idea of learning to listen in prayer. Yeah, I mean, most of us, when we think of praying, we think of speaking, petition, thanksgiving. I think it is hard for us, right, to learn to listen.
Yeah. Really, really difficult. Yeah, I think when you have prayed about people or prayed about yourself or prayed for specific things, and those prayers aren't answered, a lot of people can lose faith. And I certainly, in the groups that I was in, and now I help people who have suffered these losses in health or in losing someone very dear to them, someone very important to them, or both, that it's very easy to lose faith. And I certainly encountered a lot of people who are very angry at God. And that's okay. I mean, that's what the Psalms are all about, is, expressing our feelings to God. And that's one of the components of the prayer practices that I include in the book, is that we share with God before we get to the listening part. Share with God where you're coming from. He already knows, but I think it's important for us to just sort of lay it out there and to be honest with ourselves. I think, at least myself, I tend to kind of cover up how I'm feeling, and to deal with those feelings sort of on my own, and to present a good face. But God already knows. The woman at the well story is one of my very favorites. Jesus knew her intimately, knew everything about her, and that sense that, in fact, I get goosebumps even as I talk about it, that here is this man who knows so much about her and loves her anyway. I think that's the incredible part about listening to God, that we can talk and talk and talk, and we can lament, and that's absolutely fine. But there is a point where, if we learn to listen, I think amazing things happen, things that you definitely didn't expect, that you couldn't possibly have predicted. And I think that listening prayer, or what we call contemplative prayer, helps us to pay attention to things that we might not have. And it also helps us, of course, to kind of get out of ourselves, which in grief, we're very involved in our feelings, and we have to be. We have no other choice. But at some point, everything drops out. You have nothing left. You're depleted. And there you find God right next to you, and He loves you anyway, and always will, and always has. So it's quite an amazing feeling.
I think that place in grief when you hit anger, for whatever reason, but especially in grief, it's very easy, I think, to feel like, well, I can't bring anger to God. I can bring love to God, and forgiveness, and compassion, and petitions, thanksgiving. But to bring anger to God, I think I know many people are very uncomfortable.
Yep.
because, I mean, bringing anger to somebody that you're in a love relationship really is a deep intimacy of trust.
It is. Yeah.
You know, and I think there's also that sense of being proper with God, that people want to
Right.
be proper. We're used to being church where we don't yell and scream.
Yeah.
And so, I've been one who's, been known to sit in front of the tabernacle in a, empty church and yell and scream. But I
Right.
know when I've shared that with other people, that their first reaction is to just be horrified.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, why should I stay home and yell and scream to myself when I could go to the tabernacle and yell and scream to God about this mess?
Yeah.
But that there is an intimacy there. Because I mean, we usually don't get angry at total strangers. Most of us who are kind of,
Right.
in the normal, we get mad at people we love.
Right.
Our most rotten selves come out with people we love, but we don't usually bring that to God.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and expect to hear something and reply, but he does reply in the silence.
He does. Yeah. Yeah. And I think we kind of have to learn to listen for how he speaks with us. I really think that spoken with many people who've had these experiences of hearing God or feeling God. It doesn't have to be necessarily a voice, but sensing God. I think that God speaks to us in ways that he knows we will be alert to. And I suffered a very profound loss during the pandemic. My son died, actually, my eldest son, and everything was shut down, at least in California. I don't know if it was where you are and where your listeners are. Yeah, so we couldn't even go to church. Could you?
No,
Could you? Yeah.
not for, we were 3 months that we couldn't, I was blessed because having worked at a seminary, I knew some priests privately where I was able to occasionally get the Eucharist, and our priest was pretty good about it, quietly as he could. But we were 3 months before we could go to Mass in any, yeah, and that just was really hard.
Yeah.
Because my husband and I are both pretty much daily Mass communicants, and so yeah, to go 3 months it felt really awful.
Yeah.
We were
Yeah.
ringing the bell. Of course, we had online Mass, so our priest was Zooming and all of that, and we would ring the bells and here at the house. But there was no obviously receiving the Eucharist or going to confession, and yeah, it was a very painful time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course, I was taking care of an elderly person at the time who was completely isolated in her her assisted living. And yeah, I was seeing elderly friend of mine dying alone, not from COVID, but her husband couldn't come in while she died of liver disease.
Oh my God.
He was in the parking lot and she was dying, and rather than bring her out to the parking lot, there was no protocol set up for anything. So she died alone in her hospital bed while he sat in his car. Neither one of them had COVID, but but they were separated by the whole COVID insanity. So it was horrible. Yeah, a lot of horrible grief and misery that came out of it, in addition to people, dying from it.
Right.
Mm.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, no, it was a really, really hard time for everyone. And I think made us even, the Eucharist is so special when you can't have it. Confession is so incredible when you can't have it. So I think there were many terrible things about the pandemic, obviously, but there were also some things that really drew us to what's important. And we didn't even you couldn't go to the beach. So, there was no place to walk and just, reflect or scream at the sky. But fortunately, I have a beautiful garden. And so I went to the garden and spent a lot of time there. I planted some seeds, and at the time I started working with the spiritual director and still work with her. And she really helped me to understand what I was kind of doing. This was all on Zoom. I've actually never met her yet. We just know each other for years now over Zoom. But I learned that there were some metaphors going on that I could really respond to, and she helped me to see what those were. Planting seeds is really hope. I mean, the fact that you spread these little wildflower seeds and then you go out every day and you water, which was very important for me getting out of bed. I had to tend to my little seeds. But there were just so many wonderful experiences that I had in the garden that I just knew that God was helping me through this really, really difficult time. I was actually writing my first book, Buttons and the Butterfly, at the time, and one of the things I was doing was taking photographs both outside of the butterflies. It was a wonderful time for monarch butterflies and their caterpillars and so on. But I would put the photographs up on the screen, and then I would, and I tell the story in the book of how I threw this photo up that I had of this wonderful caterpillar. I'd actually been watching him. He was on the same plant, and he was, getting fatter and fatter and bigger. And I threw this photograph of him up on the screen, and I could not believe it, but there was this little aphid hanging underneath him that I had absolutely not noticed. I mean, it was right there underneath him. And of course, for Buttons and the Butterfly, the aphid had to be part of the story. But I started to think, maybe I should be looking at all of my photographs in a little bit more detail. And then ideas sort of seemed to pop in head, or scripture that I read that day, or a quotation seemed to kind of go with the photo, and that's where comfort came from. And I think I called it comfort because the book really ended up being comfort for me in learning to listen to God in those what really were metaphors in nature. I think that's a way that God speaks to me. And but it means that I have to pay attention, and paying attention means we just kind of still ourselves and quiet ourselves, but sometimes we have to get it all out before we can become still. And that's where I think, being honest with God, who knows anyway, but being honest with God, and therefore being honest with ourselves, brings that true self, to that prayer time.
I thought it was interesting that you said healing is more like growth and learning rather than a cure.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I certainly encountered this in many of the groups that I joined, and I went to a couple of therapists, and certainly I heard words like, getting over it, and, heard other people say that, after a few years, you'll just get over it. You'll wake up one morning and it's just not there anymore. And
it's like you're like, my son has died.
Yeah.
Like, first of all, I mean, when we lose someone, we don't want to get over it. We don't want to get over it. We don't want to be in pain, but we don't want to get over it either. Right. In fact, it's just the opposite. We want that person to be part of us forever.
Right.
And find ways to you're trying to find ways to hold on.
Right.
And survive and move, like you say, move forward, but you don't want to get over it.
Right. So there really is, there's a whole research field on healing in grief, and I say in the book there too, there's not a healed state. There's not a point at which you say I'm healed, because you love that person, and like you said, you always will love that person. And I think some people get stuck in grief because they feel that it is in the depths of grief that and they're kind of afraid to go to that point, but staying in the depths of grief is where they're going to hang on to that person. But there is a way for that person's life to become integrated into, I think of the time before I got pregnant with my son. He wasn't in my life yet, but it was because he entered my life that that's why I miss him, because he's now become a part of me. And likewise, that I can become this person who was really transformed by his life, and who the person I became because of him, I think, in my life. But no, I don't think there's a cure. I don't think there's a getting over. There's a movement called grief recovery. I don't believe that that's healthy, honestly. I think we need to integrate our loss into all of our losses into our lives. And when we learn to listen to God, I think we start to see that perhaps God has another plan. We tend to think that grief is an end, or a loss, huge loss is an end. But I had this day where I was there again looking at my little caterpillar and was following, on this bush. And one day he wasn't there, so I went looking for him, and he was right on the side of the pot. I Oh gosh, this, think of the metaphor of this. He looks like he's dead. This is before he'd gone into the chrysalis stage. He looks like he's dead, but there were just so many aspects of this in terms of the Passion of Christ and the Paschal mystery, what's going to be happening to that caterpillar, as well as trying to understand, where my son was, and will I be united with him again? And of course, that really transformed my faith as well. I felt I had to understand that at a much more personal level than I ever had, both in terms of death, but also in terms of my faith.
So many books that I've written will sort of ask us the question of, like, when are we aware of God? When are we aware of Jesus doing things? But your book asked the question, when I was really surprised by it, when am I unaware of Jesus? And I was like, what? Like, oh, like that really caught my attention, because I thought, well, most of the time we're more likely to be unaware of God than aware of him. So it was really fascinating to bump into that question very early in your book. When am I unaware of Jesus? And I was like, oh my, well,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think once you start paying attention, he's just everywhere. And, I'm actually writing another book about these moments where I have this experience of really feeling like he's speaking to me, that are, just so profound. And I think we all, if we pay attention to that, we have these, I call them holy ordinary moments, that if we start to see God working in our lives all the time, in everything that happens, and he always will be, it just, it's transcendent. There's just this other level to our lives, really a supernatural level that I think we in the West don't really, it's so foreign to us to think about that. But having these holy ordinary moments, you start to realize you're having them all the time. And I hate to think that I had one of those moments and I didn't recognize it, and thank God for it. What a tragedy to do that with even those ordinary moments, let alone those very big moments where I don't think God causes the pain. I don't think it's a huge mystery why these things happen, but I do know that he is there beside us, and that's why I called it comfort, because that's that feeling that he is beside us is just is quite extraordinary.
You talk early on in the book that, in this learning to listen for these moments, that we often approach God pretty much just with our intellect. and that it's really this grace involved in opening our heart, which of course when we're in grief can be like really like tight shut, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
I think we have our ways of being an academic. I really lived in my head. And I've always had a difficult time expressing my emotions. I think that's why I write and always have. I write to understand how I feel, but it doesn't come naturally to me to be able to label an emotion. I think some people, especially academics, approach things intellectually, and that's why Buttons and the Butterfly, I had to just understand what this metaphor was meaning in my own life, but at a very, very simple level. Some people say it's a children's book, and I always say, I wrote it at the level of children because really that was the level that I was at. I had to turn my faith into something very, very simple where I could explain it to a child. It kind of was the child in me that I was trying to, explain or describe what was happening.
I mean, we see that. I was thinking of Shel Silverstein's The Giving Tree.
Right,
And it's like, is it a children's book? Well, it is, but it isn't.
right,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
right, absolutely. Yep. That's the level at which we, I think, can really grasp at the intellectual approach. Or I looked the other day at some of my early versions of my books, and they are so academic. But it's a very I know you've taught as well and been in academia, but it's a very different. I think I'm even doing it right now, over explaining, because you're trying to have your students understand everything. But in writing, we sort of just, lay it out there and allow the reader and the listener to have God work in through the words or through the images in their own lives, in that own individual special way.
Your book discusses, I mean, tragedy comes to all of us. I mean, nobody, some certainly bigger crosses than others. But I don't think anyone escapes the cross. And
Yeah,
that it really does present us with a decision of whether we're going to turn towards God or turn away from him. And we've all seen people that have done one or the other. We know
right.
people that have I know people, one of their son died and they left the church.
Yeah,
I don't know if it was years ago now. I don't know if they ever came back.
yeah,
And then other people have had a child die and they run towards the church because, well, as a convert, I'm like, I don't want to be outside the church because I've
right,
been out there and it's horrible
right,
out there. But
right.
I have seen people leave the church. And so we are presented with this, I mean, we know we're all given enough grace to stay connected,
Yeah.
but we still have that free will. What do you think makes the difference between someone who turns towards God, yelling and screaming and kicking and screaming, but turns towards him, and the person who turns away, yelling and kicking and screaming? I mean, you're in the way I look at it, you're still yelling and kicking and screaming, in both scenarios.
That's right. Yeah,
It's just one you have, God with you, and one you don't.
yeah, yeah. Well, I tell the story of the 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 door in the introduction to the book, of how I had always thought that I was knocking on God's door. So the Matthew version of the door, knocking on God's door, asking him for things and petitioning. And really my prayer had been completely that, and my prayers had completely not been answered. And so in my research and in my studying and trying to, comfort myself in all of this, I encountered story of the door in Revelations, where it's Jesus knocking on our door, God knocking on our door. And that I find that people tend to, I certainly was this way, that they usually know both versions, both sides of the door, but they tend to think one way or the other. So I think there's that in terms of understanding where God is in this. I mean, if we believe God is in everything, then He is in everything. Everything. So if we have prayed and prayed for an outcome, it's really not, like a king and going to presenting our needs. God is in everything, and it requires a complete surrender, I think. But I always tell people, read the Psalms. I even have a little book just of the Psalms next to my bed. All of those emotions, the emotions that we're really uncomfortable with, the anger, that rage at God for what has happened, there has been someone in the Psalms who has written about it. In other words, we are not alone. Other people have experienced it. So I think it's comfort with those, again, comfort with those feelings that it's okay. And people who don't feel it's okay to be angry at God, I think, don't want to present it to God. They are very uncomfortable with that kind of a relationship with God. But as you said, if it's a very close relationship, if we have expectations of people, we get frustrated with them, we get angry with them. And I think that's really, when we're angry at God for our prayers not being answered, it's because we had an expectation. There was an outcome that we thought was going to happen, we wanted to have happen. But God has other plans for us. So as difficult as that is, but He's going to sit with us in the muck. I like to imagine Jesus sitting next to me, the woman in the well, and she's just laying it all out. I'm that woman, and He's still there, and He's just sitting and listening. But then things have to turn. Now it's my turn to listen to Him.
I mean, I always often think of that point in the Garden of Eden after the fall. God is still walking in the garden.
Yeah.
Where are you guys? And they're like, we're hiding. It's like, why are you hiding?
Right.
We're the ones that hide. He's not hiding.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think shame really enters into that. Shame in the garden and trying to cover themselves up and ourselves up. I think shame is a huge issue in recovery from being stuck in grief, not recovering from grief, but recovery from being stuck in grief is working through some usually emotions and issues that you've had for a very long time. And shame is a very, very common one that I've encountered in working with the bereaved, and even with people who have chronic illness and chronic pain. Shame. And the word that I always tell people, just put that, when you start to feel that shame, remember you are God's beloved. Just say beloved, beloved. And for me, there's just this shift that happens. It's absolutely wrong to think of ourselves as shameful in God's eyes. Usually,
that second question in the Garden of Eden, I love when God says, like, who told you were naked?
right.
You're not naked. You are clothed in majesty. You are my children. I've clothed you in my light. Like, who told you you're naked? You're not naked.
Right.
I always see that as this deep, deep
Right.
sorrow of
Right.
God. Who
Right.
told you that? Like, that's horrible. That's not the truth.
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. Like I tell people I work with, Would you say that to someone else? You know, the things you're saying to yourself, would you ever say that to someone else? That's exactly how God feels. He doesn't speak terribly to you and think terribly of you. He might want some behavior to change, but he loves you deeply, and he loves the real you, the you that you might have hidden for a very, very long time. But he loves that real you, that baptismal identity, I think.
One of the things that your whole book is about is really encouraging, what I want to say, creative expression of
Mm-hmm.
ways to work things out within ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about poetry and drawing and journaling, scrapbooking. Want to share some of that with us, because I think it's really important. It's a huge part of your book because it's really you have like daily activities that people
Mm-hmm.
do.
Yeah, yeah. And they're all centered on a particular theme. Um, and the quote or the scripture and the photo that I really the pairing of them was a prayer exercise in and of itself. And sometimes it would change. So I would then reflect on what that theme was that I felt was reflected in the quotation and the photo. But then I think working through grief, so here again are these best practices for helping people who are really stuck in grief and just despairing, is using all of our senses. And I think we have to find ways that God is speaking to us. For some people, it's music. I have a lot of exercises where I draw people to my webpage as well, because I have a lot of music that I recommend for people to get started, that they might find that that's the way that God speaks to them, or the way that they best feel that they can get into this stillness, quiet mode. And so I think art plays an incredibly important role. So it's really art of the whole senses. So that's where poetry comes in. And I have a lot of exercises where I ask people to perhaps write a prayer. That was something that I started early on, was writing my own prayers, and I found them a really wonderful way to there again engage in this listening component, but engaging the senses. Yeah.
As I read that in your book, I was thinking, we're made in the image and likeness of a creator.
Mm-hmm.
And so creating it's in our nature to create.
Right.
And so to tap into that, especially in grief, because we often don't feel at all creative when we're in grief. I mean, it's that, I call it the black hole. You're just in the black hole. You don't feel anything, goodness, truth, and beauty are like,
Right.
you're just in that sensory black hole. It's so
Right.
bad. So to do something, so often, I mean, the Bible says, don't wait till you feel something, do something, and the
Right.
feelings will follow.
Right.
So one of the things your book really encourages us to do things.
Mm-hmm.
I loved. It's very practical, and do something, do X, and see
Right.
what happens.
Right. Some way to sort of pull ourselves out of that, like that. You described it as that black hole, I think that's really important. Yeah.
And I think it's funny that often when we start to do something, I mean, our thought, our intellect says, well, this is stupid. This isn't going to change anything.
I know.
But no, just do it. Just do it.
Right.
The old thing, just do it. And it's amazing how things can change when we just do something.
Yeah.
Because we are getting out of ourselves when we create something.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, just think of all of that holy art that we go to these beautiful, beautiful churches, and we see these stained glass windows, and I think of the Pietà, these images that we connect with our faith, and often just sort of imagine that painting was always there, because we've seen it so often. But there was an artist who had a feeling. I had a verse. I talk about one in the book. An artist who, he was just in his early 20s, and there was this verse from Revelation that really, really affected him deeply. And he painted actually many versions of this painting that I talk about in the book. But that could be any of us. We could have a verse that becomes sort of a mantra for us, that we feel is something that we could spend our whole lives trying to deeply, deeply understand. And when we enter into something that deep in our faith, which can come, for him, it was just repainting and repainting and repainting this Jesus knocking at our door. That was such an incredibly important exercise for him. And this was Holman, and he traveled around Europe showing this painting. They called it a sermon in a frame. It was people just lined up, just massive amounts of people wanting to see this picture, his sermon in a frame. And we can do that ourselves. We don't have to have millions of people come to see it. And I imagine him being very, very driven by something that was standing out to him, but that he created out of nothing, other than...
Look at most famous artists, writers. I mean, there's usually pain that precedes, their artwork.
Yep.
Their, difficulty. You look at the writings of Flannery O'Connor, you look at the poetry of Mary Oliver. I mean, it all comes out of deeply painful lives. That this, it's like, it's that, that little bud of a flower that comes up through the dirt, and the manure, it's amazing what comes up through manure.
Right, absolutely. Well, that's what was so... I remember the day that my spiritual director said, "Why do you think you did scatter seeds?" I just did it because I needed to get out. I needed to do something. I felt so frustrated, and as we all were during the pandemic anyway, and then just no way to just in traditional ways to express my grief. And she said, "Why did you scatter seeds?" That's where I began to realize there are metaphors here that are completely out of my control.
You mentioned that we usually often in prayer don't know what to ask for. Mm-hmm. So art can be a means of trying to figure out what to ask for.
Right.
Or maybe that we don't need to ask for anything. It's just going to show up.
Right.
When we need it.
Right. Those answers. Yeah. I remember one day I'd had some very bad news, and I also mentioned this in the book, and I had, my husband and I had gone to, this was after the pandemic, and we'd gone to a local restaurant, and I was sitting at the table, and the owners who I figured out were the grandparents of two children that were sitting there with their parents. And they came out one by one. So I'm sitting there, bereft in this terrible news that I'd had. And this grandparent came out, and without words, each one of them came over and just patted the children on the head in this just loving gesture. And for me, it was totally, this is what God is doing to me all the time, and I'm not aware of it. And it was there again, just such an incredible metaphor, one of those holy, ordinary moments that I'll just remember for the rest of my life. I've always wanted to go to them and say, "Do you know how much you helped me?" By your just ordinary, loving, non-verbal ways of being with the people you love.
I think that's a beautiful lesson for all of us to think about, like just sometimes just reach out, sprinkle those little seeds here and there, because you don't know how they're going to take root.
Mhm.
I make a point now when I, interact with people, cashiers, kids in the supermarket, various places of trying to find something I like about that person, their earrings, their hair. Even if
Mhm.
it's silly and crazy, I'll say, that's quite an interesting hair, the green hair. That's quite,
Right.
you know. Um, just some way to connect on a
Yeah,
personal level with other people, because I think we're a society that desperately is desperately lonely, and we
yeah,
need those connections so badly.
yeah,
They're so important to reach out and just make a personal little connection with somebody, because you don't know how that little pat on the head
right,
is going to have a huge effect, the butterfly effect. We don't,
right.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, just this ripple. Uh, yeah, yeah. So you'd said we often don't know what to ask for in prayer.
Mm,
Um, I think one of the things we can ask for in prayer is simply to get through the day. In early grief, my husband and I would pray to just get through the moments,
yeah,
and
for the moment.
we don't have to ask for anything, specific, but asking for something just in general, or be with me. These are all perfectly wonderful prayers, and reading the Psalms can help us learn ways of talking to God. I think the Psalms are just incredible for giving us a model for uh, talking to God. Yeah,
Mm.
what
And
to
I think
ask for.
also reaching out to other people. We don't pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps very well,
No,
We
no,
really need others. We really need to reach out and allow people to minister to us.
right,
Yeah.
right.
I
Yeah,
mean, I went through a really difficult 3-year grief in my life, and I always say I had 5 friends who kept me alive 24/7 for 3 years,
yeah,
for whom I will always be deeply grateful.
right,
God bless them, and got me through that 3-year period of time in my life of that black hole.
yeah,
And it was the grace of God and others, people that
right,
carried me when I was not
right,
carrying myself at all.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And how important it was for your friends to be able to help you, that allowing that grace that God had given them to minister to you. It's a hard lesson, I think, for some of us. We tend to be those bootstraps, or at least I do, those bootstraps kind of people, and we're not giving people then the opportunity to help us. I too had a friend. She was my best friend in high school, and we had lost touch over the years. She had moved all over the world, and I'd moved out of Africa, obviously. And we started another friend helped to connect us, but we hadn't seen or heard each other's anything in 30 years. And we started Zooming together, and of course, it was just like, old times and that connection. But I completely think I know it was grace. What made her reach out to me? I mean, um, we hadn't talked in all of that time, but what was it that made her somehow, I still don't know the chain of events that happened, but for her to reach out, and she completely got me through, because she too had suffered grief, and she knew somewhat of what I was going through, and how important it is to just listen as a friend. And
Not
so,
have answers, just listen. Yeah.
right, 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 right.
Yeah.
And
I think people sometimes don't reach out to comfort others because they think they don't have the answers, and you're not looking for answers.
no,
And you're not looking for recovery, like you mentioned, you're looking for transformation.
right,
And that is going to just take time for
right,
one thing.
right, right,
So I think when we have been in these situations ourselves, I think often one of the things we learn is compassion
Yep.
and patience with other people who are
Right.
now in the black hole.
Right.
We
Yeah.
know how black it is. We know you don't see the light at the end of the tunnel when you're in it.
Right.
It's just freaking black. It's dark,
Absolutely.
it's empty, and you
Yeah.
just want to die.
Yeah.
And you just don't want to wake up in the morning and go through another day of pain. And so, when someone reaches out to you, it's not that you want answers from them. They're just there.
Right.
They're just there.
Right. 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 Yeah. And that's what this friend was for me, and all of my other friends as well. Just listening, and it's just such a gift. And yeah, I think that's a really important thing for listeners who might have a friend or someone that they know who's going through terrible grief. Is all they want is presence. That's all, not a TS at the end.
Yeah.
Presence, as in the opposite of absence. It's not
If you're
gifts.
afraid to reach out, it's okay to be afraid to reach out. Like that's part of what courage is that we reach out
Right.
even when we're afraid. We do something even when we're afraid. So if you say, "Oh, I'm afraid," well, that's okay. Like
Right.
just it's okay to be afraid. Just reach out.
Right. 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 Imagine what that person who's grieving is feeling. So, better that you be present to them in one way or another. That's the key. Yeah. Yeah.
You talk about your book is called Comfort, Meeting God in Grief, and you talk about comfort not as relief, because often we think of, but as a participation in God.
Yeah, I had a bit of pushback on the word comfort. I think because some people feel that we shouldn't be comfortable, and that's the sort of a version of comfort that they were thinking of, and that's another whole story for another day. But this kind of comfort, I think, is the comfort. The image I like to use is of a baby who expects that intimacy with a loving parent. That's just, they come out of the womb expecting it. And I think we spend our whole lives trying to find that kind of comfort in the people around us. Some of us are lucky enough to have married, spend our life partner is that kind of person. But we spend our whole lives wanting that comfort that we've expected. And I like to think that it's the kind of relationship that God has wanted for us, with us, since the day we were knitted in the womb. That is that kind of closeness, that kind of comfort. But it's not comfortable. It's the comfort of knowing that person, that loving parent, is always going to be there. That loving God, as we grow older and lose our parents, lose loving relationships, that God is always there. That kind of comfort, that we really can expect it, but it's not necessarily comfortable.
No. Oh, so if you were to hope for one thing that someone would take away from your book, what would it be? What would the truth be?
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much in your book.
Well, thank you. I think kind of a mission statement that I sort of have, and I'm finding that I'm doing versions of this in everything that I'm writing, is that it really is in suffering that we find our way home. That original person, that soul, that spirit that we originally were. I think suffering, it isn't the only way to get there, but in suffering, we can get to that home that that is our home with a capital H.
Mm.
So it
We
isn't
like
suffering,
but it comes, doesn't it?
Yeah. But I think you have to enter into it, and not to be afraid of it, because as soon as you do, you're going to realize that God is right there next to you.
That's beautiful. It's beautiful. There's so much in your book: comfort, meeting God in grief. They always say you can't judge a book by its cover, but this is a glorious cover.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, is there anything you'd like to mention? That there's so much, like I said, but is there anything else you'd like to mention?
I think we've really covered a lot. Yeah. I talk about the cover, actually. That cover means a great deal to me. I remember that little flower. That was one of the wildflowers that I planted. And it's actually a very small little one. It looks tall in the cover, but it wasn't. But it just sort of reaching for the sky. It just is this image of hope for me. All of us reaching for heaven and that eternal comfort that we will one day have, and that we might have here on earth in short, holy, ordinary moments.
So it's been 6 years since your son died?
5, yeah.
Years. So how is it now? What is it like now for you?
And there certainly are times where and there isn't a day that goes by that there isn't something that reminds me of him, or as a trigger. I was in the grocery store yesterday, and one of the things that often happens in grief is that people avoid you. And I passed someone that was a very close friend of mine when my sons were together in elementary school. And I know she recognized me, but she just walked on, and it just was so painful again. But I thought, Judy, you've done that yourself. There have been times that you've avoided someone in our community. Their son became quadriplegic, actually, a terrible accident. And I remember seeing her in the grocery store, and I didn't say anything. He was there, so I make the argument that, what would I say? But I'm sure that's what other people say. But there's just nothing like, and there's no end to going up to someone or calling someone or going over to their home and saying, I'm sorry it's been so long, but here I am. And I think that people can be a help to people in grief. That the help at 5 and 6 years is as useful and as meaningful as it is right afterwards. So if one of your listeners has been one of those people that hasn't reached out immediately, do today. Just apologize for not doing it earlier, and then get back in that person's life. It will mean the world to them. And perhaps you cross paths for a reason. Maybe there was something tugging at that person, somebody tugging at you. Maybe I could reach out to her. So yeah.
I think sometimes we tell ourselves that we're terrified of saying the wrong thing, but I think the truth is we're also terrified of saying the right thing. We're terrified of saying anything.
Right.
We're just chickens in our faith sometimes.
Right.
And we just have to get, courage is a virtue.
It is. Yeah.
And we really need to pray for that particular virtue, because, a lot of times people think, well, people who are courageous aren't afraid. And it's like, oh, no, they're afraid. They just do it anyway.
That's right.
So, praying for that virtue of courage to reach out, regardless of our feelings of fear, to, even if it's just that little seed, that little pat is so important.
Right.
It's a beautiful book, Judy. Where can people get your book?
Well, thank you. It's on Amazon, and I have it in hardcover, and I have an ebook, and I have a paperback as well. So all 3 versions are available.
Beautiful. Is there a website associated with you or your book?
There is, and it's really easy. It's just judyfoy.com, and I have a lot of resources on there for people in grief that I know that spiritual directors and people who work with the bereaved, and also people with chronic pain and chronic illness, there are a lot of resources there. And I've deliberately put resources for the sort of psychological aspect of dealing with loss like that, but also the spiritual care, because I really feel that those are resources that are not as available, and I hope to help change that.
Well, it's a beautiful book. I just want to say to our listeners, it's a great gift book for people who have lost someone or lost somebody or something, a job. They've lost something that's really precious, and they are in grief. It's a nice, practical book. It's an easy book, very easy to use. I loved it. I love it. So check it out. Comfort Meeting God in Grief by Judy Foy. Lovely.
Well, thank you so much.
It's a wonderful tool. Do you want to end us with a prayer, Judy?
I would love to, absolutely. Lord Jesus, you wept at the tomb of your friend and turned sorrow into resurrection light. Bless all who grieve and all who seek you in loss. Gather them beneath the wings of your mercy until every tear is wiped away and love is made whole in your presence. We ask this in your holy name. Amen.
Thank you so much. This has been delightful.
Oh, likewise, Kiki. So nice to finally talk with you, and I really appreciate the time, and helping people to find where the book is.
Thank you so much. God bless.
Yeah, thank you. You too. Take care. Bye-bye.